Good evening, everybody. So I'm Harrison Foyer. I'm the New York Director of Public Affairs for Equinor. I lead our engagement efforts across the state of New York. And I want to thank you all for being here with us tonight. Whether you're here with us in Brooklyn or joining remotely, which I know many of you are, given the snow and given that, it might be just nicer to be at home than drive on a night where there's snow on the ground. So as we start, we'd also be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the community's role in welcoming the offshore wind industry here and fighting for decades for the revitalization of the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. And what Mike Stamatis from SSBMT so eloquently put as a special place with a rich history as the center of maritime activity in New York Harbor. Because of the leadership of so many, including groups like UPROSE, New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, Community Board 7, and so many more, we have an opportunity to do more than just put power into the grid. We have an opportunity to listen to the community and progress our project in a way that we can all be proud of. And tonight is another step forward brought about by all of those groups that have fought so hard for years to bring environmental justice to this community. So at the outset, this group here, sitting next to me tonight, is here to talk about what's next for the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal as it transforms into a world-class offshore wind staging and assembly facility and the future operations and maintenance base for the Empire and Beacon Wind projects that will bring clean power to over 2 million New York homes and doing it with a key role right here in the heart of Sunset Park. So the operations and maintenance base is currently at a 60% design phase. And this meeting will be an opportunity to update the community on the project and to gather input from participants ahead of the 90% design phase. So we presented to Community Board 7 on this a few weeks ago, and we want to once again thank them. You can take a seat. We want to once again thank Community Board 7 for what was a productive and informative meeting. So as we enter 2023, which is a year in which the Empire Wind Project and the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal will see considerable progress and milestones for the Sunset Park and Brooklyn communities, we want to pick up on that progress. And we can best do so by listening to your constructive feedback and meeting those expectations wherever possible. So tonight, we have a number of technical experts from our team who are going to talk a bit about the feedback we've received on the design to this point and how we're working to adjust the design to reflect this feedback to the greatest extent practicable. So the focus of tonight's event is on the design of SBMT, and there's a multitude of factors we're going to discuss, including access to the waterfront, as well as what we're reviewing given state and federal requirements for safety and security at a power generating facility, power controlling facility, and international shipping facility. We're going to discuss the building look and feel as well as the lighting, where our team has more to go into, incorporating some of the feedback we've received thus far from the community. And we're going to talk about much, much more than that. But the design of this facility is just one milestone. It's a critical one, and it's even more critical that we get it right. So for our presentation today, we're going to have this more thorough and robust demonstration of our efforts and the current status. Following that, I'm going to invite our subject matter experts to join and take some of your questions on the design. Also, for everyone joining us on Zoom, if you want to put your questions into the box, we'll make sure that we get back to you on those too. Following that Q&A session, we're going to open up for an informal poster session and enable everybody to get to talk with the subject matter experts here one-on-one. So bottom line, if we could leave you with two single things from tonight's presentation, they're this. We're committed to listening to you. To the extent that we could reflect your feedback, we're very much looking to do so. And secondly, we have an industry-leading team of technical experts committed to implementing your feedback and building a project that the community will be proud of. This will not be the only opportunity for this dialogue. We're going to be creating many more opportunities in the year ahead. And we have a fundamental respect for the fact that we're not just working to build a project in the community, but we're looking to do it with the community. So with that, I would now like to turn it over to Harriet Green from our operations team.
Great, thanks Harrison. So I'm Harriet Green, I'm the operations manager for our Empire Wind and Beacon Wind projects, and I'm going to take you through the agenda that we have here. If I can get the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you to the company, give you a little bit of a feel for what we're trying to achieve here with these local communities. What we're then going to do is get an overview of the project itself. and then dive more into the work that we're doing specifically here at SBMT with all the port development, including, as Harrison mentioned, the longer-term O&M phase. And then we're going to look ahead at what timelines we have for that development and future engagements as well. So what are Equinor doing here? We have our Empire Wind projects split into two, Empire Wind 1 and 2. We also have Beacon Wind split into two, Beacon Wind 1 and 2. We have offtake agreements for Empire Wind 1 and 2 and Beacon Wind 1 with New York State, where we will be bringing our power directly into the heart of New York City. We are still working on Beacon Wind 2, so we're not sure where that's going to be yet, but what we do already have is 3.3 gigawatts of renewable energy committed to New York, which will power roughly 2 million homes, so fairly significant in what we're trying to bring. With that power also comes $2.5 billion in economic development commitments, specifically to New York, $52 million in community benefits, around $25 million focused on environmental research, which is very important to us, and all of this around developing a 73-acre offshore wind port facility, which will be state-of-the-art for a budding industry, and that comes with 500 long-term jobs and 1,500 short-term jobs. So it's no small feat we're trying to achieve here. There's a lot that we're trying to do, and all of that we want to do with the community. So a little bit then on how offshore wind works. So why are we going offshore rather than onshore? The wind is much more consistent. You don't have as much turbulence, as many obstructions, and being coastal, we actually do get the best winds, so generating the most power right when we need it, which is during those peak use periods in the mornings when you're getting up, getting ready for work, and in the evenings when you're getting home from work, cooking dinner, turning on the lights, and generally setting in for the evening. So this is great because what it enables us to do is generate the power also right where these population centers are. So New York City is in a prime position where we've got great coastal waters with good potential for energy production, but that's also where the demand is, so we don't have to take this power too far from where we're generating it. So that's really what we're trying to achieve with these projects. So I'll focus a little bit more on Empire Wind 1 and 2. These are coming first and will have much more of an impact specifically here because the Empire Wind 1 cable route is also going to be coming into this area and connecting up to the Gavanna substation just down the road. But the total lease area comprises of around 147 turbines, 2 offshore substations, and it is 15 megawatt turbines that we will be using with an upper blade tip height of around 951 feet. So very significant structures we're going to see out in the ocean. And each rotation of the blade powers a typical New York home for 1.5 days. That is one single rotation of one turbine, and we're going to have around 147 of these offshore. So again, just to put into a little bit more context what these projects are going to be bringing to New York. So then a little bit more focus on our work with the community. So one of the reasons we're here, one of the reasons we want to have these events, is we do operate with a community-based development model. That's really important to us. We do have immense respect for the environment, which is, again, why we're moving into offshore wind. But we want to do that engaging and communicating actively with all of our stakeholders. So whether that is people on the land around us or in any of the communities that we're going to be passing through. So that does create local jobs, and we do want to invest in local communities, but we need to talk to the local communities to understand what's going to be most impactful. So that's where these engagements are so important to us. But as well as communities, we also collaborate with fisheries, with environmental justice, frontline tribal communities, and a lot of the regulatory bodies as well, with our goal through all of this to be transparent, to be collaborative, and to be open. So those are our core values as a company. A little bit more on how we're engaging. So what we are developing is an offshore wind learning center. There's a few images here on the slide which are examples of what we've done elsewhere. So these are actually from the UK, these top two, where we've developed a learning center for one of our projects there. You may also have seen in the media, we have launched an offshore wind ecosystem fund, which is to primarily support a lot of local workforce development initiatives. We also very recently launched our Offshore Wind Innovation Hub, which is a partnered project where we are looking to support innovation and developments that will help this industry grow. And then we have other commitments on top of that. So one of those through our procurement is committing to 30% MWBEs, which is minority and women-owned businesses. So we do have specific goals for that, including the work we're doing here at SBMT. And we're also supporting NYC EDC's Offshore Wind Waterfront Pathways Training and Capacity Building Program. So we're trying to engage as much as possible in these programs that will help not just our own projects, but help the industry grow. And then finally, on our engagement side of this, a little bit more on the Learning Center. So the plan eventually will be to have an educational outreach center, which will cover students K through 12 from local New York public schools. So trying to raise that education awareness of this industry and all the opportunities that it brings. Trying to get participants into offshore wind educational programming, and just generally anyone interested in joining the offshore wind industry, learning more, what it's about, what opportunities might exist. So some of the highlights, as we've kind of demonstrated, we've done this in other areas. Info videos about offshore wind, so that's the educational piece. Interactive exhibits, including on some of the port activities, and just general awareness of potential career paths and opportunities for people wanting to join the industry. So with that, I will hand over to Calvin, who will talk a little bit more about the specific port development here.
Thanks, Harriet. So quite a bit about what Equinor does globally and even what we're doing generally to the region, but want to talk a bit more about South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, right? So how we're going to transform what you see in the top left picture there to the future where we're handling these 15 megawatt wind turbines. And again, Harriet spoke on the size of these devices. You can see in the bottom left corner just the scale of how big these components are that we're bringing. So that's bigger than anything that's ever been handled here at the port before. So we have to do quite a bit of work to upgrade those facilities, to upgrade the bulkheads, add new infrastructure and pavement for the cranes, and then add new components down at the bottom for the operations and maintenance space. So if you go from left to right in that picture, you see the components and where they'll be stored. And that's right outside this window here. Then our operations and maintenance space, and I'll have a few more details on that as we go through. And then that onshore substation that Harriet talked about that will actually bring the power into the grid and feed New York City. So the hope is that in the next few years, we'll be able to really bring this site up and add those jobs that we've been talking about. But you see it out the window here, but for a lot of you from Sunset Park, what does that really mean to the neighborhood, right? What am I going to see if I'm in the park? And we've gotten some feedback before and some questions on the lighting. So I did actually want to show you, if you're in Sunset Park, where is that site here? And for those of you who are local, you probably know this perfect, but it's hard to really imagine if you don't have any icons to look at. So most of you probably know Sims, or hopefully you do, and their wind turbine. So kind of tried to draw that in to highlight where that is on the picture. That turbine sits just where it's drawn there, at about 135 feet tall. And the lights that are here today are at 100 feet tall, and the ones at the O&M campus, I'll talk a bit about what we're doing to those to try and reduce the light pollution and ensure you still get those great sunset views and skyline views that you get at night here in the city, right? So again, just trying to really show that we are looking at this and we are adapting our design from the feedback we heard from Community Board 7 in the past. So a bit about the operations and maintenance base, right? So this is a high efficiency building. We are going for LEED certification and WEDGE certified across the port site. We're going to utilize shore power for the hybrid vessel, and Harriet will talk a bit more about that later on in the presentation. It'll be a control room. So this is where we'll control Empire, Beacon, and even up to 10 future wind farms at this site. So quite a bit we'll do there to maintain and make sure that we're operating safely and efficiently to bring that power when you need it the most. The offshore workers will actually rotate here to go off. So they're on generally about 2-week rotations, and you can see the dock, or a rendering of the dock out in the edge of the picture there. So that's where the vessel will come in, and the crew will have the facilities, lockers, and changing rooms to be able to go off-site. Then a few facts about the building around using electric forklifts, charging for electric vehicles on site, working with the local community for community-led solar wherever we can, and then a mural also in it, and we'll show you some better renderings of that coming forward. So some of you may have seen previous renderings and even the earlier one that showed a different color scheme. We've done quite a bit of work to try and bring that back and tie it into the community a bit. Quite a bit of feedback when we presented to the community board in November around the window placement, and we've tried to work to bring that into a single line, and even the color scheme and bringing that into a more, one that fits in a bit better, to be honest. We are also hoping, and you can kind of see off to the left, that we'll be able to put a mural on the building there and work with the community to paint that in a way that reflects the local Brooklyn and Sunset Park area. A piece that has come up quite a bit is what's the fence around the site going to look like, right? Is it going to be, and it will need to be a high security fence. We do have control operations for these wind farms. But we are looking, and even when we go back to the poster boards later, to hear some feedback, understand what the community likes and what fits in better with the local area. Some of these look similar to what you see at Brooklyn Bridge Park and some of that space. A few other changes. I talked about the lighting. And at the port site, we're going to need to keep the existing lights that are sitting at 100 feet. These components are large, and we need to keep the light there to be safe for everyone. But at the O&M base, we recognize that we don't need to use those same lights. So we actually have reduced those from the original design down to 40 feet, thanks to the feedback from the local community, from Sunset Park and Community Board 7. So we've taken that in, we've relocated those lights and tried to use building mounting wherever we can. Again, it needs to be safe for everyone at the campus, everyone can understand that. But when we're actually looking at how it affects the local community, we are trying to implement that wherever we can. So another one I know is traffic. I'm going to hand it over to Brian, who can talk a bit about how our construction will impact that.
So traffic was one of the feedbacks that we received from the community board, but let me take a step back. And what we have done is we have looked at the construction of the port, the operation of the port from now on into the future, and we've completed a full state and city environmental review of all the proposed activities, including traffic, air, and all the other aspects of the project. And that's being compiled into a larger environmental impact statement that is for the entire Empire Wind project. Specifically, we have a slide here on traffic because that was raised by the community board in our presentation. And one we wanted to give the feedback on it is that the traffic using the city process was not going to adversely affect the local traffic during the peak times of the construction of the cars in and out of the site. We have and submitted our analysis to the DOT as well through that. And there are other aspects of the environmental impact that can be found online and reviewed, and we can answer questions on that. But what I'll do now is I'll turn it back to Harriet, who will talk about the actual operations of the port once we develop the port, and is the future use for that. Harriet?
Cheers, Brian. Okay, so a little bit more on the long-term activities that are going to be happening here right on your doorstep. So this is after construction. Once we are operating these projects, we're generating power. We need to maintain these assets just like you need to maintain your car. And we have to have a whole setup to be able to do that. So we will have a state-of-the-art onshore and offshore operation and maintenance hub right here, just outside the window. This is, as Calvin mentioned earlier, going to be our hub for Empire Wind and Beacon Wind and potential future activities as well. So the highlights of this include the electrical substation, one that we will have just outside here, one that we will have on Long Island. We need to operate and maintain that. So a lot of those activities will be centered out of this facility. We need to manage health, safety, and environment. These are all key priorities for Equinor. We are all about safe and efficient operations. So it's really important we've got a system and a setup that can actually achieve that. So all of our management of health, safety, and environment will be right here on the ground where our projects are located. As Calvin mentioned, we will mobilize our offshore workers from here. So we get to the wind farm by boat. So This bottom picture is an example of a service operation vessel. This is actually from one of our UK projects. And the workers will board the vessel here at SBMT, and they will then stay with that vessel for 2 weeks offshore. So they'll do rotations 2 weeks on, and then they'll have 2 weeks off before then starting their next shift. We will also have smaller vessels that can work out of here, crew transfer vessels, or CTVs, for any of those shorter visits that we need to make in the shorter trips offshore. We will have a warehouse facility where we can store and manage all of our parts, tools, and equipment. So there's a lot of logistics management, a lot of warehouse management that will happen here as well. And as has already been mentioned, a control center. So the top picture here actually represents, again, an existing Equinor control center where we will run the wind turbines. They are unmanned assets. We don't have people staying actually on the wind turbines when they're running. There's a lot of automation, a lot of data and signaling that comes from these. And this is where it all comes into, so we can monitor and control them. We will have a lot of maintenance and logistics planning. So we will have planners, we will have coordinators, we will have a lot of administrative support, as well as engineering and technical support. Again, all housed right here in SBMT. And then any other business-related administration that you can think of that you would typically need to run a business, we will need for these projects as well. Some of that will be based here. So to dive a little bit more into the jobs, this is always a question that we get, is what type of jobs will exist? So I've said a little bit about how we have offshore work, how we have onshore work. So typically offshore is all the maintenance technicians, the people that are going to be accessing and maintaining the wind turbines and the substations. But we will also have some offshore planning teams as well, making sure that we have smooth running day to day. We will also have the vessel crews themselves. These boats will not drive themselves. We do actually need crew as well, and we are a long way offshore. So if we get into trouble, emergency services are not coming. So we do have field medics, and we have a lot of very highly trained and competent people to be able to respond, to get people back on shore, and minimize the impacts of any situations that may arise. As I said, safety is our #1 priority. Then with the onshore, it's all of the jobs related to the activities that I mentioned. But then on top of that, we may potentially have jobs that aren't located here, but are still within Equinor or within our suppliers to do all of the other running that we need. So typical activities, again, relating to a business like this: finance and control, IT support, procurement, and other technical specialists. So, right down to human resources, facilities management, all of these jobs that you can think of that you need to run a business, you will find in the offshore wind industry. So this is really a great opportunity, but we also need to engage with the community to make sure that the workforce is there when we need it. So that's all on the jobs and the operations and maintenance. I'm going to hand back to Calvin to talk you through more of the timelines relating to the project.
So I think after jobs, the #1 question we generally get asked is when, right? When are we actually going to see the port start to change? So today we're still doing the detailed design. Kind of gave you a flavor of the amount of work we need to do to upgrade the site and to make sure that this works the way we want it to. So that'll take us through about the rest of this year to continue that design and begin our construction planning. We've just brought our construction contractor on board. We're starting to engage with them to really talk through these plans, understand everything from the traffic to where they're going to start first, which buildings are they going to work on, and how long is it going to take. The hope is that early next year, about a year from today, hopefully, we'll be here breaking ground on site. We'll be here with earth movers, construction trailers, a whole crew of people, the jobs we were talking about, actually starting the transformation of the port. That'll take about 2 years, just for the port part alone. The offshore construction and the O&M base will actually extend beyond that. But that'll allow us to begin bringing those wind turbine components in, and you'll start to see those large, massive components here on site. And those will come through for Empire Wind and the future projects beyond that. So really quite a bit we're hoping to have here in Brooklyn at SBMT to support these projects. So with that, I think we'll open it up to some questions and answers. Thank you, everyone.
No, thank you all. So we're going to do some microphone logistics. So one's going to go around to the audience if anybody has any questions. One's going to go to our experts. And also just just as kind of a moment to frame the conversation here, we want your feedback for the design. There's still time to get your notes, and you're talking with people who really know the ins and outs of how we can best implement it. So we want to really keep tonight focused on the design. If you have other questions, we're happy to try and take them as best as we can, but mostly on the design. And whatever we can't answer tonight, we're happy to get back to you afterwards.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm a Sunset Park resident. I'm sure we've heard this before, but one of the biggest challenges that we have is having access to the waterfront. And I'm wondering, how in the design is access to the waterfront incorporated so that we can have access to it? And then whether it's possible to add air monitoring stations to the design so that we know and we can measure how much air pollution is being generated by the facility.
Thank you. So I'll take the first one, a bit about public access, and then I'll pass over to Brian for your air monitoring, if that's all right. So we heard that feedback in November when we presented to the community, and we've spent a lot of time looking at the site and trying to identify a way for access to the waterfront, recognizing our goal is also to make it a working waterfront, right, to make these jobs and everything accessible, to bring these components in and out. And to be honest, there's some security that we need because of the fact that it is a control room for power grid across the United States, right, for the wind farms here and hopefully for some of our California projects. That is challenging, right? We are looking at it. We're trying to find an option, and we don't have something today. We haven't stopped trying to really look at the arrangement of pieces on site or look at some programmatic type options, which I think were suggested from the Public Design Commission as well. So it's still in work, but there isn't anything that we have in it today. Don't want to give you an answer that I can't promise right now.
And then regarding your second part of the question, during the construction, the improvements to the port, we will have air monitoring stations around the fence line. We entered the site into the New York State Brownfields program. We're going to be doing environmental remediation of some of the legacy contamination that exists at the port. And during the construction of the work, we will have particulate and vapor monitoring at the fence line to ensure that nothing is leaving the site. During the construction, we're going to be looking at trying to minimize any air emissions during the operations. For example, we're going to be running power to the construction areas from shore so that we don't run generators, and we are going to be using that. During the operations and maintenance aspect of the operations of the port, the building is going to be completely electric. You heard in some of the design that we're going to have electric forklifts and other aspects. But the SOV or service vehicle, that boat that Harriet mentioned, is actually hybrid, and it will be fully electric when it comes in from the Verrazano Bridge and be all the way to the port and back out. So we're looking at other ways, and it's the first SOV in the wind farm industry to be hybrid that we're going to be using here at the port. So we're looking for other ways to minimize any air pollution. But we expect it to be de minimis, and we've definitely analyzed it in an environmental assessment. I can answer more questions at the posters after.
Thank you, Esther. Any other questions?
Good evening, guys. Just a quick question from your previous experience with doing this type of work, about how long is the training process for the construction workers to be seaworthy?
So we're talking more about the offshore certifications
Yes.
for this?
Or, the process, so all forms of training and certifications needed.
Yeah, of course. So when it comes to more of the technical skills, that's very job specific. So I won't touch too much on those, but the things that are more specific to offshore wind that aren't just transferable on the technical side, it's really around safety training, basic safety training to be in the offshore environment. So there is a global organization called the Global Wind Organization, not very creative. They certify programs across the world to make sure you have that same standard of safety training. Typical program is 5.5 days. So depending on where you get that, it can be stretched out to 6, but it is generally across 5.5 days, and it includes fire safety and awareness, so basic firefighting, first aid. As I mentioned, you're very far away from help if you need help, so we make sure that everyone is trained in that. It also includes manual handling, working at height, rescue from height. If you have an accident on a ladder, you need to be able to get rescued to a position where you can then be taken off the turbine, and sea survival. The other element that's a little bit different for offshore wind as well is transfer. So that is stepping from a boat onto a turbine ladder. Not as common these days with these big service operation vessels. You typically have gangways, but there is an element in the training to make sure that if you need to transfer by the ladders to sea, you can do so safely. So that's the standard basic safety training that will be required across the industry regardless of who you work for.
And, just as a reminder for everyone, we are going to have that poster session after this. So if anybody has questions, maybe they don't feel they're right for this forum, we're happy to take them after one-on-one. So with that, any other questions for the Q&A?
Hi, John Fonchillis, member of Community Board 7, but not representing Community Board 7 tonight. I'm going to push a little bit more on the idea of public access, the question that happened earlier. It's been 100 years since Sunset Park has been able to reach the waterfront, and as you know, we've spent 30 years trying to do Bush Terminal Park, which was a labor of love over many decades just to get that space for public access. I would urge you to look at, quite honestly, other ports that have provided public access in the Port of Miami, Port of Oakland, Port of Boston. There are situations where public access, either in a tower or a shoreline park, has provided the ability. Quite honestly, I think it would be great to be able to see the hybrid SOV come in. Think about the kids being able to watch an electric boat gliding through, being up close and personal to that. I think would be fantastic, especially for Sunset Park neighborhood kids. As well as 39th Street has always been a historic ferry terminal for us. If there's any way you could look at areas around the perimeter, I understand about security being very important, but there are areas around the perimeter that could have access for the public, either in an overlook situation, not essentially being in it, but being able to view all these giant Tinker Toys that are going to be on the site, which I honestly really think is one of the most amazing things about this, especially for a member of the neighborhood, to be able to see these things happen in our front yard. I just think it would be really important to be able to have the neighborhood and the generations to come being able to see it being assembled. So I really do want to push back on that because I understand you're looking at it, but I don't think the neighborhood would be very excited to have another 100 years being separated from the waterfront.
Got it. Thank you for that. Is there anything else to add on that, or we could, we're very happy to take the feedback. We appreciate it. We're as we said, we're still very much under review, but the feedback's important. It's important that members of the community are sending that message, and we're receptive to it. We're receiving it. We're here to listen.
Yeah, and thank you for your experience. If you have seen examples that work elsewhere, we'd be really happy again to talk and just start to list those so we can look into those in more detail and see how it's been achieved elsewhere. So we really do appreciate those inputs.
I would also suggest around the world, since you have a worldwide footprint, I'm sure you know a lot more or be able to have those resources than just me looking at Google. So I would just hope that you'd be able to find something that
Thank you. There's, as I said, there's a lot that's being considered, and there will be more announcements to come this year. Are there any other questions?
Hi, I'm Lavinia. I had a question about the Learning Center, although I don't think those are some announcements that might come later. And if not, would love to know if there's a policy on procurement for businesses in Sunset Park. You discussed having a MWBE procurement policy, but if there's, even for things like food and translation services and things like that. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you for the question, Lavinia. Is there anyone up here who might?
So yeah, I can say a little bit more, particularly for the long-term operations. There's a lot of things we're going to need on a kind of day-to-day and week-by-week basis that is obviously going to be beneficial for us to procure locally. So yeah, in terms of the way that we involve local businesses in our procurement processes, we are working very hard on that. We are running supply chain expos at the minute. So we've had one in Albany, we've had one in New York City, we're going to have one coming up in Long Island in a couple of weeks. And the idea there is to put local businesses in touch with our current identified supply chain, but also give you more of a flavor for what is going to be available, what is coming next, how to get involved and engage with Equinor to become a future supplier. And with all of those and our existing selected suppliers, one of the high focuses we do have is on MWBEs, it is on what is local, and so we are working on how that is factored into our weighting when we do evaluate potential tenders.
Any other questions?
Thank you. I have two questions. My first question is around coastal resiliency. As you know, that area is a flood-prone area. So how are we ensuring that that structure is creating a buffer zone between the ocean and Sunset Park? And then my second question is around labor force and workforce and what we're doing to ensure that the workforce that we will be needing for the maintaining of the wind turbines that you explained is coming from the local community, not only Sunset Park, but New York City in general, because I know that workforce is in Europe. Are we thinking of shipping workers from Europe to come work here, or are we building that labor force down? And if so, how?
I'll maybe take that second question first and then hand over to one of the guys for the waterfront resiliency question. So we are not going to be looking to ship people over from Europe. I mean, you can tell from my accent, that's where I'm from. A little bit of an exception because we don't have any existing projects here yet. So it's been important for us to try and bring the experience from our existing wind farms, which happen to be in the UK. So I've come from the UK. But no, the long-term plan is to build all of that locally, and we're not going to be doing that by ourselves. So we are already engaging with various existing New York workforce development initiatives and institutions. We do a lot of work with SUNY, with Farmingdale, really to work together to see what we need to do both to build the pipeline, but also to make these jobs accessible. So we're looking at diversity, equity, inclusivity, whether it is disadvantaged communities, whether it is groups that typically do struggle to access the workforce for whatever reason. We're doing a lot of work on that and looking at partnering opportunities to be able to build that competence locally. Part of that is bringing the experience from elsewhere to understand what we need to build. So that's really the phase we're going through at the moment. We're also part of the Hire NYC initiative, which will that itself comes with requirements for how we advertise locally, how we make jobs available within the local communities. So we'll be following those principles as well. So a little bit of some existing initiatives and programs, but also we're trying to bring some of our own to really target the areas that we think are struggling to join the industry, but also to build the competence that the workforce is going to need to be able to effectively work in these jobs.
So just to touch on the design of the campus a bit, and then probably when we go to the poster sessions, we can go through a bit more. So the O&M base is designed for flood protection. So the warehouse portion is actually designed to be flood-proof with flood-proof doors at the warehouse, for the warehouse doors. And then the control room and office space is up on the second floor. So I know that focuses mostly on what we're doing for our building, not necessarily a barrier directly to the community. We aren't changing the grade generally from what it is today around the site to change those pieces. So I think once we go to the poster, though, happy to talk through it a bit more on the area and what you're trying to. I want to make sure I understand your question fully on the site, if that's fair.
Thank you, Esther. The question that came in from the Zoom is how many trucks are going to be going in and out on a daily basis?
I don't have the exact number offhand right now, but what we did is for the construction, we used engineers' estimates on what it would take to bring in the materials during the construction of the bulkheads and the O&M base. Using the city's manual for estimating truck traffic, they use per square foot of the warehouse and the office building we're using, and we use that to help to generate the trip generation, that we're going to be using. And what we did is we compared it against the city metrics of peak per hour to make sure that we would have no effect. We can look in and follow up with anyone online on the exact number of trucks that were estimated. And as Calvin mentioned earlier, we just brought on our construction manager, who's going to be doing the work and will be helping us define on how exactly they're going to be doing that and the trucks.
Thank you. How many questions are left? One more. All right, you're going to be the last question, then we'll go to the poster session.
Hi, I'm Luther, and I'm also a local Sunset Park resident. You talk about trucks. Transportation-wise, from what routes are they coming from? And then with regards to the picture of the turbines themselves, they looked rather sizable. So is it coming from the BQE along going down south? Because that turn is actually pretty tight. Is it going down 39th Street? Is it going down 2nd Avenue? Because I know that that's also going to impact traffic, and then also if there's ever an accident, that's going to be pretty extensive because it's pretty a tight, compressed urban area. So I'm curious to know about that, and then just kind of figuring out about the contractor that you're using. Is this someone that is a local contractor, or are you hiring someone separate for that?
Okay. So the first question is a good point. These parts are large. They're actually coming by water. So the turbine parts are going to have the tower sections, what they call the nacelle, which is the power generation, and the blades will all be coming from water from different manufacturing sites. The trucks that I mentioned are for the actual construction. The piles are bulkhead, those workers that work. And even some of the piles and sheet piles are going to be coming by water as well. We're working with our construction manager to figure out other ways to use the fact is that we have rail, we have a port on how to minimize truck traffic through. Regarding truck traffic, there are planned truck routes through the area that we have to abide by and that we're going to be working with the DOT to make sure that we can get trucks in and out of the site for construction and minimize the traffic to the community. Regarding the construction manager, it is Skanska, who has done a lot of work in New York and will be staffing up locally.
Just to clarify, you're just saying that the majority of the materials are coming from the water? Or
Wind turbine. Yeah, I'll pass this.
So if you look at the SBMT and think of in two parts, first phase is the construction phase, right? When we have to get the port ready. That construction, majority of the civil, your concrete coming in, your pile material coming in, that's by road, by trucks, right? And the construction crews. But once the port is ready, and when we bring these Empire Wind components, the windmill components, they will come by water, they will be stored here, and they will again go by water to the offshore location. So that's the difference. And to answer your question, we have recently announced Skanska to be the construction manager for the port construction. They've been here since 1971 and done many important projects here and really done a great job with respect to having sufficient MWBE participation in the scope.
All right, well, thank you everybody for being with us tonight. We're going to go to the poster session. We're happy to take your questions. You can speak with all of our subject matter experts. There are other ones who are not at the stools with us up here. If you do think of any other questions after you go home, send an email to us at empirewind@equinor.com. We're happy to answer your questions there too. Thank you again for being with us. We'll see you at our next event.